to session, the work session for the Metro Council on July 9th, 2024.
Oh, President Peterson, could you move, your mic is a little far away from you.
Like a mile. Good morning. I'd like to call to order the work session for the Metro Council on July 9th, 2024. And Connor, will you go ahead and call the roll?
Yes, thank you. So Councilor Rosenthal.
Present.
Councilor Simpson.
Present.
Councilor Wong.
Present.
I believe we'll have Councilor Gonzalez joining us shortly. Councilor Nolan.
Here.
We will have also Councilor Lewis joining us shortly. And finally, President Peterson.
All right, present. Before we begin our agenda items, can you please play the safety video for our in-person attendees?
I'm Jason, and I'm an event production manager.
All right.
You want to go ahead?
Having a little trouble with the video, but in the event of an emergency, please call 911 and notify the folks at the front desk. The nearest defibrillator is located on the stairs leading down to Grand Avenue. And we will also exit through the north door in this room and go down the stairs to Grand Avenue in the event of an emergency.
Great, thank you, Connor. All right, we have a couple rather large conversations today. And the first one is the recommendation from our Chief Operating Officer on the housing discussion. Councilors, as you recall, we directed our COO, Melissa Madrigal, back in January to use a multi-pronged process of engagement and research to explore options for regional affordable housing funding. And last month, you updated the council on the process for developing recommendations for continuing funding affordable housing and for improving homeless services. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our Chief Operating Officer, Melissa Madrigal, for the recommendations based on all of the hard work from everybody in this room. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Council President Peterson, and good morning, Metro councilors. I look forward to spending time with you today to share all of staff's recommendations on the future of affordable housing funding at Metro and to get your feedback and guidance on next steps. We do have a presentation, so I will just wait for that.
Should you be a little closer to your microphone?
Oh, sure. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Is that better? Okay. Next slide, please. So in January, you directed me to engage a broad array of stakeholders to explore the options for continuing to support affordable housing development, knowing that our region was facing a funding cliff as soon as 2025. Over the last 7 months, speaking with hundreds of people from subject matter experts to implementing partners, direct service providers to economists, Metro has done extensive quantitative and qualitative analysis to develop these recommendations. While there have been deep policy discussions, vast technical research, and scenario modeling and analysis, I want to be clear that we know that this isn't an academic exercise. This is about people's lives, and specifically those lives that are negatively impacted by homelessness and an extreme lack of affordable housing. I'm grateful for the members of the community, stakeholders, and subject matter experts who contributed their expertise and perspective to the development of this recommendation. And I particularly want to recognize, as President Peterson said, the incredible amount of effort put in by Metro staff to live up to the values that you set out to guide this process. Urgency, stability of existing services, pragmatism, equity and inclusion, and transparency and accountability. At our last work session, I shared a high level of detail about the various channels of information we developed and the process that we created to inform the recommendation. I won't rehash that today, but I am happy to answer any questions you have about it during our discussion. Additionally, a report summarizing the findings and recommendations we are sharing today is now available on our website at oregonmetro.gov/housing funding. It's 50 pages of a lot of wonderful bedtime reading. Please take a look if you are interested. So with the preamble out of the way, I'm going to start by summarizing the major findings of our work before reviewing the specific recommendations to respond to those findings. Next slide. As this work has come together, we've heard broad consensus from stakeholders, community, and voters in a few key areas. A majority of stakeholders, community members, and voters in the region support continued investment in homeless services and affordable housing. In the environment we find ourselves in, they prefer expanding supportive housing services investments instead of establishing a new property tax to allow the acquisition, construction, and preservation of deeply affordable housing. That is, housing for those experiencing or at greatest risk of homelessness. These stakeholders believe that the SHS tax sunset in 2030 should be significantly extended or even eliminated to create longer-term certainty for communities and providers. Next slide, please. They believe that local government is off track and could do better with its existing resources. They believe the current SHS oversight and accountability structure is not sufficient to provide transparency and ensure the desired outcomes of the measure are met, which undermines support for the supportive housing services program as a whole. Stakeholders also believe that the focus of all SHS investments should be for people experiencing or at risk of chronic homelessness, regardless of whether those funds are spent for services or housing. Next slide, please. Now, some voters and stakeholders also support a modest rate cut to the SHS personal income tax to address the reality that revenues are higher than anticipated, so long as program outcomes can still be achieved. Some voters and stakeholders also support adjusting the SHS personal income tax thresholds to inflation so that the tax continues to be applied to high income earners. At the beginning of the stakeholder process, we promised to authentically represent all the feedback that we received, even the areas of disagreement. So it is in that spirit that I share that a minority of stakeholders and the public do not support any changes to the SHS tax, believing that Metro and the counties have more work to do to prove the efficacy of the existing program. These stakeholders have also expressed fear that changes now would undermine the hard work that has gone into building the program. Details and supporting documentation for all these findings are provided in the full report that I referenced earlier. Okay, so as you can see, while there was not unanimity across our outreach universe, there was strong alignment in key areas, and that alignment has served as a foundation for our recommendation to you today. These recommendations are supported by a broad coalition of subject matter experts, community members, and business leaders who have worked closely with Metro to develop them. For context, there are some components we recommend you consider taking action on in the near term. There are recommendations that require voter approval if you choose to pursue them. And importantly, there are a handful of recommendations that I believe require further discussion between the Metro Council, stakeholders, and partners to finalize. The heart of my recommendation is threefold. Renegotiate the intergovernmental agreements between Metro and the 3 counties to immediately address transparency and accountability challenges. Consider referring a measure to the May 2025 ballot to further strengthen accountability of the SHS program, expand its uses to include creation, acquisition, and preservation of deeply affordable housing for those experiencing or at greatest risk of homelessness, and extend the sunset long enough to create efficiencies and leverage rent assistance to finance affordable housing projects. And finally, consider reducing the SHS personal income tax as part of that measure. Public opinion surveys demonstrated that a referral of this nature to the November 2024 ballot was likely viable. However, public opinion surveys also documented a worsening view of local government from previous surveys. Part of restoring trust is demonstrating that we are being thoughtful, careful, and sober with the public's top priority. While there is broad stakeholder support for the recommendation as a whole, there remain a handful of details that need further discussion. I believe Metro should measure twice and cut once before asking voters to make changes to the SHS program. And I think that that's in alignment with the values that you outlined for this process. A misstep here would not only foreclose our only real near-term path to avoiding a gap in affordable housing funding, but it would undermine the ability to reform and extend the SHS program in the future. I'm now going to delve a little bit deeper into some of the recommendations. So it's worth saying, I think we're on the right slide here.
Thank you.
explicitly that this recommendation and the changes proposed to the SHS program alone will not solve the affordable housing gap. Therefore, I recommend that the Metro Council consider supporting regional, statewide, and national efforts to reduce the cost of housing overall, including the cost of affordable housing construction, identify infrastructure funds to support cities in developing land for affordable housing, and support any other legislation or action that leads to a reduction in the cost of housing or the construction of additional housing. Metro Council should also consider initiating a renegotiation of the supportive housing services intergovernmental agreements between Metro and each of the 3 counties to improve transparency, increase accountability, and strengthen oversight of the existing programs to the extent possible. I recommend that work be completed by December of 2024. And Metro Council could also consider legislatively enacting improved accountability and oversight and accountability provisions. Great. The Metro Council should consider indexing the personal income tax thresholds to inflation starting in tax year 2024. This ensures the tax remains a high income earners tax over time. And then the big one, the Metro Council should consider referring a measure to voters for the May 2025 election to amend the supportive housing services tax in the following ways. First, expand the use of the SHS tax to allow acquisition, construction, and preservation of affordable rental housing and permanent supportive housing with sufficient flexibility to complement county SHS investments. Strengthen the SHS commitment to serving those experiencing or at risk of chronic homelessness. Next slide, please. Establish clearer, more independent oversight of the program by creating a single independent investment board appointed by the Metro Council and representing subject matter expertise in key areas of the system, including but not limited to lived experience, homeless services, healthcare, behavioral healthcare, substance use disorder and treatment services, affordable housing development, finance, the justice system, and data and performance. This investment board would be responsible for making recommendations to the Metro Council regarding program goals, outcomes, affordable housing targets, and data-driven key performance metrics as components of a new regional investment strategy to ensure that homelessness is as rare, brief, and non-recurring across the region as possible. Next slide. Council should consider implementing a direct feedback channel to the independent oversight body for direct service providers and those with lived experience with homelessness and housing instability to inform the development of the regional investment strategy. Council should consider requiring counties to submit new local implementation plans that conform with the regional investment strategy and demonstrate feasible work plans to meet key performance metrics established by the investment board. And council should consider requiring Metro to set regional reporting frameworks, standards and definitions for service types and delivery, prepare monitoring plans, accountability mechanisms, approve housing projects, and fund regional investments to improve system alignment, coordination, and standardization within our existing 5% administrative cap. Next slide. As part of this referral, Metro Council should consider dedicating a minimum percentage of funds to capital investments in affordable housing and permanent supportive housing. A portion of existing carryover would be used for immediate investment opportunities, and future capital funding allocations would be driven by the regional investment strategy and local implementation plans. Council should also consider extending the sunset enough years to leverage rent assistance for affordable housing development and ensure long-term stability of services for people experiencing chronic homelessness. Next slide. Last couple ones here, we're almost done. We are also recommending that council incorporate changes to SHS that better address cities' needs for support and coordination from supportive housing services partners. And lastly, we're recommending that you consider a reduction in the personal income tax rate so long as that can be justified and the outcomes of the measure to serve folks can still be met. Next steps, should the Metro Council choose to pursue a ballot measure, I recommend that the council convene an elected to elected work group led by the Metro Council president or her designee to finalize the remaining details, including the length of extension, degree of personal income tax rate reduction, and the need for stronger partnership and alignment with the region cities. Staff also recommends deeper engagement with those who have lived experience and those who serve those with lived experience to ensure that the reforms contemplated do not have unintended consequences. That concludes the recommendation portion of my presentation. For those in the audience today or online, I want to emphasize that everything that I just said is a recommendation for the Metro Council to consider. The Metro Council may choose to accept, reject, amend, or reshape any of these components, and I look forward to their feedback and direction during the discussion portion of the work session. Before I go further, are there any clarifying questions that I can answer from council?
Counselors, any clarifying questions? Counselor Rosenthal, and then Nolan.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just one question. One of the last bullets said, address the city's needs for some supportive services. My understanding is there's two ways, either directive or through the intergovernmental agreements. And it would primarily be through some incentives to the counties to use the intergovernmental agreements to pay more attention to what cities' needs are, or how would that be effectuated?
Thank you, Councilor Rosenthal. I'll start by just sharing kind of the feedback that we've heard from cities. And I want to clarify that no city is the same. Our region has many different cities of different sizes and different values. But there are some themes that we heard consistently. One, we heard that, cities are serving the same populations that we are serving with the supportive housing services tax, but they feel that they are not necessarily coordinated with or supported by our program. So some cities have requested direct funding. Some cities have requested better coordination. How you get to that, could be through agreements that you make. It could be through, changing the structure of the program. But I think, the important takeaway is that cities are critical partners on the ground in this work. And, they have signaled a desire for us to improve how we interact with them.
Thank you. Counselor Nolan, and then Gonzalez and Simpson. And Wong. We'll just go around.
Thanks, Madam President. I want to dig a little deeper into the accountability, transparency, performance. Those are words that are used by a lot of people, and in my experience, not everyone has the same notion in their brain when they say the word accountability or they say even the word results. And I'd be interested in any conversation you or the team had in the course of this community engagement around what that means. And in particular, yes, there are some national trends and West Coast trends that we cannot by ourselves overcome. But in my listening to the constituents I'm most directly accountable to, I'm hearing that they don't just want to do things or build things. They want to help their neighbors and into permanent housing, into stable environments, into safe environments. And how do we move in the direction that our objective is to make sure everyone has a place to live safely, and not just that we've built so many units, because that doesn't necessarily achieve the housing for everyone.
Thank you for the question, Councilor Nolan. I think, I shared in the recommendation, the overarching goal of the system should be to make homelessness rare, non-recurring in our region. And I think we have to start all the partners involved with that sort of high level goal, like what are we trying to achieve for the system? And then I think that the promise of an independent investment board is then to help take that high level goal and break it into key indicators of progress toward that goal. Then in this proposed system, the counties would develop plans to respond to those overarching goals, to share with the Independent Investment Council and the Metro Council how they plan to achieve those goals. And they would need to meet a feasibility test in order to have those plans approved. So, and I'll back up because I quickly got into the weeds there. I think the important thing to note about our current system is that the accountability is very backward looking, where the systems are set up to report out what happened rather than a system that we do need to do that. We need to see what happens, but a system that has strong standards, definitions, and expectations up front. Plans are made to meet those expectations. Everyone is clear. It's a two-way street of transparency and commitment to implement those plans. We really need both. We need the prospective planning, we need the indicators along the way, and then we need the accountability on the back end because things do go wrong. And so in my opinion, our current system is weighted too heavily and almost exclusively on the end. Once the money has been spent, and we need to do more upfront to ensure that we are using the tools that we know work, measuring our progress, and actually meeting our goals.
And may I just interject? I think that what Marisa and I talked about is a work session to be scheduled ASAP on being able to just publicly have a conversation about what is basically the federal minimum that the counties have been reporting for a very long time. And that's kind of their expectations versus what are the key performance metrics that could be created in the future by this task force as we move forward based on what's going on in other regions. For instance, you know, we know that there are other regions across the country that have put a lot of effort into key performance metrics beyond the federal minimums. What do those look like, right? This is not an intent by anyone involved, as far as I'm concerned, of a gotcha on anybody who is, you know, receiving this money, counties or cities. It's more of a conversation about what's going right and what's not on trend of what we expected, and being able to articulate that, what is not on trend of what we expected, and then figure out what it is and fix it and move on to the next thing, right? So it's not intent and should never be viewed as a negative, but it is hard to set up that next new unknown, right? And I think it would behoove this council to have that first conversation about what are those federal minimums and what are other key performance metrics that others are using, so that we just have a better idea of where we're headed as we move forward.
If I might just
Yep.
follow up. I think you're on track there. But I think the measure itself needs to clearly articulate what the outcome will be, or what the outcome we collectively, Metro, the counties, the cities, the service providers, the housing developers, expect to deliver if the voters grant the funding that we would ask for.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that decision, that clarity should be left to an independent body. I think the independent oversight body is a good idea, but I see that body's job to be reviewing whether we're making progress toward that publicly accepted and voter approved outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And if not, to make corrective action, to require that the counties or the developers or whoever changes what they're doing to put them back on a track to get there, to get to the end that we collectively and most particularly the voters have approved. If that's what you're thinking about, I'm in.
Thank you. Yes, and to clarify, the Investment Council would be making recommendations to the Metro Council. And the Metro Council has the full authority to decide what goes in the measure, including, you know, a high level goal that we all agree to. So thank you.
And one final comment, and I'll defer then. In my experience, listening to the constituents who I'm accountable to, they did think that a 10-year plan was going to end the homelessness crisis when they voted for it. So we extending or making permanent will require some dialogue with voters. And I mean dialogue, back and forth. And if we're not going till May, we have time to do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you. Counselor Gonzalez, Simpson and Moore.
Yeah, thanks, President Peterson. Thank you, Marisa, and good morning, council, and everyone else that has joined us. Today is obviously a very big day for us at Metro, and I've been looking forward to this conversation for a very long time, from when we first talked about having this process led by your office, Marisa. And what I said at the beginning and what I say now is that this process has always been about how do we make our response to this deep and treacherous crisis better? How do we serve people that need their government to work as well as possible? And I remember when we made that decision to go down the COO route, we wanted to do so because we wanted to try and turn down the political chargedness behind this issue and really bring together thought leaders from every corner of this issue, from housing production to service providers to healthcare. I mean, a really comprehensive process. And frankly, I think that's what the voters expect of their governments, for us to not dig in our heels about, we're going to do this, don't tell us what to do. And for us to really just have a relentless pursuit, again, of what works, what could be done better, where could we improve. And with the amount of money that the voters have entrusted to Metro and to our region, I think that we have that responsibility to ask that question. And so the spirit of that I see reflected in the draft recommendation that you shared. And, I think it highlights everything from, again, the council should consider, separate to this, how do we continue to build housing? And after this, we have an urban growth report conversation where we have other tools in our tool belt where we can talk about that. But what I think is important for us to continue to lean into and what I want to say, I agree that we need to find ways to improve oversight, accountability, and renegotiate the IGAs to give us and give the region a sense of having our hands on the steering wheel collectively. And our ability to keep that promise and to open up that flexibility. A lot of my conversations with constituents from, everyday voters, my neighbors, mayors, city councilors, county commissioners, I feel like when the first headlines broke on this, there was this, this umbrella of the money's going to be redirected to build, this level of housing similar to the bond, comparing to the success of the bond. But my expectation, and I guess this is a time where we can talk about that expectation, is that the flexibility that we would ask from the voters is that we're able to use that money for those high impact investments for the population A communities, especially communities that need deeper service, deeper care, a different kind of housing than what our region has been able to build with deeper subsidies. And we don't have that right now. All the other housing that we know we need to build, we need to find a way to do that. My expectation is that this will be highly focused. And so I want to, that's kind of a first layer question that I would love to hear your thoughts on. And second, it's, we were able to present to the Beaverton City Council last week, which was our first presentation that we've been able to go out and do formally. And we had some really great conversations there. And there was a strong theme that we hear from people that care. How are we making sure that we're prioritizing these dollars for the services that people want? And again, I feel like there's maybe a misunderstanding or a fear that a lot of that money is going to be redirected. But again, my expectation is first and foremost, our promise is to the services and to helping people get off the street, in addition to these other services that we need. So if you could talk about that a little bit and how through your recommendation, you're weaving in the spirit of that. And ultimately, there are some bigger conversations, and I appreciate how in your recommendation, you state very clearly for a measure, we will need to have an elected to elected work group led by the council president, because that does rise to a different level of policy.
Yeah.
And for a ballot to include deeper questions around the sunset, around the reducing the rate, et cetera, those are really big questions that we need more time to have. And I know I've been talking a lot about, I'm talking a lot here, but just really, I think we care really deeply about this. In general, I find it hard to see something that I disagree with in your proposal. So I'm sharing that here. And I appreciate that we've had a lot of conversations about this as well. If you could help us talk about that. And specifically the question is, what are the mechanisms to make sure that we keep our promise to voters while adding the flexibility and the oversight to this government and also to the voters to make sure that we're driving those investments? And I'm always thinking population A, 75%, population B, 25%. Haven't forgotten that.
Absolutely.
So I would love to hear your thoughts to that.
Thank you, Councilor Gonzalez. I think, it's worth noting that when we began this process, we had a slightly different concept in mind. We have this amazing success with the 2018 housing bond that is, projected to go over, achieve more than 20% above its goals. And so, we were originally thinking maybe we propose something that cleaves off some funding or a percentage of funding, and goes into a separate pot that then Metro administers, and we just kind of replicate what we have today. As we talk to our stakeholders and we listen to the concerns, and we heard from counties, we didn't hear, we don't believe in affordable housing. Everyone knows that that's important, especially deeply affordable housing and permanent supportive housing. But the concern was, please don't just set like this arbitrary, threshold and force us to, make decisions that may not be in the best interest of the people that we serve. And so this concept of, could we just give counties some flexibility to figure out what the right mix is in their community of services and housing services, including, outreach, shelter, all those wraparound services and deeply affordable housing. And, as we talked about that idea, we began to feel really had some merit, because there is as much money as there is in this system. It's not enough to meet every single need that we have. And so there does need to be a prioritization process or a reprioritization process. And for us, the key to getting that flexibility to work is in the stronger governance. If counties have the flexibility to create their own plans and their own mixes, then to ensure that we're meeting the regional goals, that we're reaching the outcomes, that the housing that we're building is the kind that we need, that's financed in a robust enough way, we need to have governance that ensures that that happens. And so I want to emphasize that the two things are tied together. That flexibility for the counties and stronger accountability and governance go hand in hand we believe, to making that model successful. But I do think, Washington County, Clackamas County, they are also the housing authorities. They already are building affordable housing and deeply affordable housing. And so, this would be a benefit to them as well.
Yeah. Can I ask a quick follow-up as well? Thanks. And one thing that hasn't come up yet, as one of the suburban metro councilors, especially, we have a lot of cities in our counties. And one of the themes that's come up is finding out how we fund our local partners as well. And so that's going to be a thread that we're going to need to pursue as well. And there's a whole bunch of different ways that we can go about that. But I want to thank you as well for including that and highlighting that. Mayor Beatty always says cities are the first line of democracy. And I think many folks around the table here would agree that cities have a lot of responsibility in this and do a lot from their general funds. And so to find out how we support that ecosystem in those investments in a way that is aligned with the measure is going to be really important. So just want to end it there. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Simpson, and welcome, Counselor Lewis. I know you've been listening in.
Thank you, Madam President. First of all, I want to lift up and appreciate community, the time, effort, and the sacrifice to come together and put this document together, and to show up here today in person. Thank you. I want to thank staff because it was a heavy lift, and I want to thank Marisa for spearheading. Leadership often is not uplifted, but today I want to uplift your leadership and making sure that we got to this place with your recommendations. A lot of questions have been asked, and a lot of them were along the same lines for me, particularly around the small cities. I really want to uplift you coming out and chatting with Fairview, Wood Village, Troutdale, and hearing their concerns about funding smaller cities. Again, they are our first line of defense and they need support. And we can't cookie cutter stamp every city with what Portland does or what Beaverton does. We have to have that clear vision that we know there's a diverse need amongst our community. And I think you did a really good job of highlighting that in this document.
Thank you.
A lot of my questions got answered, so I won't pontificate for too long, but I do want to uplift point E in your document, where we set our regional frameworks and standards of definitions. Key and crucial, especially if we're going to hit that 75-25 split. And I really want to appreciate and hold up that this bullet point right here brings us right back into our auditor's report, where we know we had some gaps where we needed to fix things. And we kept it under the 5% administrative cap. So that's great. My last piece is this, and it may be this a question you can answer for me. The new independent board, how does it work with the Tri-County planning body and the governance structure of things?
Thank you, Councilor Simpson. That's a great question. So our concept would be, so currently there's multiple governing bodies. There's the Metro Council, there's the SHS Oversight Committee, there's the Tri-County Planning Body. What we would recommend is combining the functions of the Tri-County Planning Body and the SHS Oversight Committee into the new independent board. The work that those bodies are doing is really important. We don't want to lose track of that or dismiss it. But the current system, it's audits have pointed out, we have experienced it ourselves. It can be complex, ambiguous. Who has responsibility? Whose role is it? Who's on first? And we believe that consolidating, making it more efficient, having one place that everything goes through before it gets to council is going to be more efficient and clear. And I think our partners, our counties, are spending a lot of time responding to all the different committees, and I think this is a way to keep them focused on the work on the ground and have the accountability be more efficient and clear.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councilor Wong.
Great. Thank you, Madam President. And thank you, Risa, and the staff for running a great process. I heard a lot of feedback from the community, just saying this is like one of, Metro's shining moments in engagement and being in that position of listening. So thanks for that. One concern I have is really kind of weighing the opportunity costs in delay between November and May. And, I think we're approaching this like we are confident that voters would pass a measure. And I don't want us to approach with that mindset necessarily, because, this is an election and, they can go either way. So I just want us to highlight that point first. It's just, we're making all these recommendations that may or may not proceed, depending on the electorate, which, rightfully so. But I'm wondering, just in kind of the trade-offs, like, how are we going to address, 6 additional months of uncertainty while this process plays out? And I can see a lot of benefits in the delay, but I'm just wondering how you might think of, for, the Tri-County Planning Committee and, other oversight bodies, like, they may or may not exist in a year. And like, how would we manage that dynamic where they're able to work in the short and medium term, knowing that they, might go away and there might be another body. And also just, just with affordable housing development and production, time is money. So that 6-month delay does potentially impact projects across the region and also future projects. And I'm not really sure, have we fully considered the impacts on our housing development partners on what that delay might mean for their projects and their staffing levels? Is there going to be a pronounced cliff or not? So just, if you could speak a little more about this interim period and how we can kind of address the challenges so we can maximize the benefits of that delay, both kind of politically and in oversight and in production.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Wong. So we've structured the recommendation to give as much certainty as possible to you, in considering, most of the components here are ready to go. I would say that, the governance and accountability changes, expanding the uses, those things are solidly in line with stakeholder input. And one thing that you could do to reduce uncertainty is to, say, we support these parts of the recommendation, and for the areas that need further exploration, you really focus the conversations with stakeholders and voters on those details and not on the question of whether or not to refer. So I feel, obviously I would very strongly about expanding the uses of the supportive housing services tax to include affordable housing is the right thing to do for our region, for the people that we serve. And so I think that there are some pieces here that you can be confident in, while still acknowledging that we have a few more conversations to go in some key areas. I think, we in applying the value of urgency to this process and an acknowledgement of that funding cliff, we have always also tried to make sure that urgency didn't turn into haste. And I think we have heard from many of our partners and stakeholders over the last month or so, would you please consider a May referral instead of a November referral, so that we have time to go in, holding hands together. And so, we are trying to respond to that. And I think in the scheme of, if the council chooses to refer an extension of this measure, and the voters approved that, we're talking about a generational shift. And in the scheme of that shift, a few months to get it right is, in my, view, worth it. Especially if folks out there, developers, service providers know that we're not losing momentum and we're just continuing to build that coalition that's going to go out together.
Thank you. That's compelling. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis, and then we have some folks who have hands raised again. Go ahead, Councillor Lewis.
Sure. Thank you so much. I want to appreciate all the work that went in, not only by community, but by stakeholders across the region who were invited to tables here at Metro, to tables in their communities, and to participate in a process that felt at times really deep in the weeds, and also at times like a hurry up and wait. And the opportunity here was to make sure that we were hearing all perspectives. And I think that your recommendation has incorporated a lot of those. There are, of course, going to be individuals who are looking for something that they think is left out. But at the end of the day, the opportunity to do something is ahead of us. And lo and behold, people want to do something. What we have right now isn't working. And most fundamentally, if we are going to continue to work to resolve homelessness, somebody who is without a house needs a home in order to become housed. And with our inability to continue our pipeline of deeply affordable housing for people with low or no income, without being creative and looking to revenue sources, this is the right direction. I am particularly wanting to underscore the need for 3 separate intergovernmental agreements. We must continue to look at what each county is doing well and what each county needs in order to be accountable to the voters in that part of the region. You can be homeless in any of our 3 counties or in any of our cities, and it looks and feels different. So it does not make much sense to me that we continue with a one-size-fits-all way that we work with our counties and our cities. I want to highlight as well your recommendation that we move forward with individual city funding and plans for city services that serve this population. Clackamas County did a little bit of this just in the past 5 months, 6 months. And I do hope that the other counties will move forward working with their cities. It's important. And then finally, I felt like the sense of urgency that we met this challenge with was right. Many people were frustrated. Many people said, you have a foregone conclusion. I believe in this recommendation, we are showing we do not have a foregone conclusion, but in making ourselves work towards the pace of November, it was not a foregone conclusion we were going to go in November, but we were working as if we were going to keep that pipeline as open as possible. That is not possible. We are going to see that pipeline constrict, but I do not hesitate to say we're going to do the best we can to let it be constricted for the shortest amount of time possible. When we are so reliant on vouchers as one of the gems of the supportive housing services system has been local vouchers that need a unit to be attached to, or else the voucher is just a piece of paper. I'm reminded of about 10, 11 years ago when I started to work at the intersection of government and homeless services. I went to meetings with the city and the county every week, and they had a list of people who had had vouchers with voucher extensions who could no longer keep that voucher because they had been seeking for too long. That voucher bounced back and went to the next eligible person. And we all knew that that next eligible person was going to have that voucher and be a seeker for so long that they could not find a safe place to call home that they could use that voucher. I do not want to go back to that place we were at 10 and 15 years ago. I want to go into a future where when you get a voucher, it means a real choice and a real safe place to call home. That's what this recommendation is steering us towards. And that's where I'm ready to go. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Follow-up questions, Councillor Rosenthal and Nolan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a question. But first, I want to say thanks to the process that you used and the thoroughness and the thoughtfulness of the proposal. I think it meets all the needs. I think it's important to realize, and one of the themes is that we are building upon what we've learned and we're building upon successes that we've had. And we started from scratch and we have actually come a long way. And I think it's important. Not everybody realizes that yet out there. But two things, I guess the one question I really have is, and it keys in a little bit on what Councilor Nolan mentioned, is when we go to the ballot, and May is fine, I think, assuming bad things don't happen. There's going to be two aspects to it. One is going to be the technical aspects that we're going to be talking about, such as the indexing, such as the slightly lower rates, such as intergovernmental agreements. But then there's going to be the aspirational aspects, and as Councilor Nolan mentioned, what we promise and when are we going to have, and have we had that discussion? What are we going to promise more? I mean, and how are we going to phrase it? That's going to be a big discussion. Are we going to promise another 3,900 units? Are we going to promise that there's going to be a fully integrated SHS and housing issue? I'm not sure that I certainly don't have the answers to all that, but I think that that's going to be an important second element of what we go to the voters with. The technical aspects as well as the aspirational aspects that we're then going to have to live up to. When we did this last measure, we promised 3,900 units, and we've been very fortunate in exceeding that. And so that it gives us some reason to say that we know, we have an idea of what we're doing, and we know a path forward. And so I just hope we stress that.
Thank you, Council Rosenthal. I will note that, under the proposed model, we would not be setting upfront a goal for the number of units of housing like we did in the Affordable Housing Bond, because we would be, through the governance process, working with counties to develop plans that include affordable housing. However, if you or the public are interested in, seeing some examples of what, depending on different choices that are made and how much funding is dedicated, our full report includes a table that shows some possible scenarios, just to give people a sense of scale. I will say that, again, even if the supportive housing services measure does not have enough funding to replicate what we did in the Affordable Housing Bond. So we are not talking about the same number of units. However, with the focus on the population that SHS serves, we are talking about more permanent supportive housing, more deeply affordable housing. And that is something that we all know that the market cannot provide on its own. So I appreciated Councilor Gonzalez's comments that, we're going to need to look at kind of everything that we do related to housing, not just deeply affordable, but this does help with one key piece of it at the very lowest end of incomes.
All right, Councilor Nolan.
Madam Chair, thanks. Thanks, Marisa, for all of this discussion. Two things I want to include in the discussion today, with due respect to my colleagues who represent suburban areas and suburban cities. We have a task here at Metro to pay attention to the needs of the entire region, and it should also be proportional. I represent two cities. The constituents I represent live in two cities in the region, one of which is 4 to 5 times larger than the second largest city in the region. So while we should be attuned to smaller cities, we should not do that at the cost of the human beings who live in the city of Portland. Just a caution there. We're also, by the time, if we refer something in May, the city of Portland will have a new governance structure. Each of its 4 districts will be larger than the second largest city in the region. So finding some way to use those districts as a mechanism for representation at decision-making tables and also allocation of funds is something we should think about before we send something out finally. And the other thing I want to talk about, we've talked a lot about funding here, but one of your earliest slides talked about other approaches or other mechanisms or authorities that Metro can use with our partners to help make affordable housing more accessible. And in that case, affordable doesn't have to be a euphemism for subsidized.
Mhm.
I would really like for us between now and any referral to include some very pointed, direct conversations with our local government partners about steps that can be taken to lower the cost of housing. We can't control national interest rates, but with streamlining processes and creating a regional template that gets kind of to the front of the line for people developing market rate affordable housing, if we shave 6 months off of their permitting process, that saves money that you and the wizards here in the room, and I mean that seriously, can figure out how to have that savings devolve to the cost of the housing, whether it's owner occupied or rental. But talking about those things, it's important because we won't be able to build with whatever funding that the voters may or may not give us. But if the voters give us additional and extended funding, we won't be able to build enough subsidized units. We have to build it with encouragement to private developers and demonstrating before May that these governments are capable of that kind of collaboration, I think will be critical in having a winning story to tell to the voters.
Thank you, Councilor Nolan. One, I'll just validate what you just said about permitting. We did hear that from developers who served as stakeholders, that time is money. And, one of the ways that affordable housing is subsidized currently is that SDCs are waived, which then has an impact on cities. There are some cities that are facing budget cuts and for which, waiving SDCs is not really an option. But if the permitting process can be shortened right now, all the budgets have, in some cases, a year-long, or more timeline built in for permitting that costs. And so if you can shorten that, you automatically subsidize the construction.
Great. Councilor Gonzalez.
Thanks, President Peterson. I just wanted to respond to something that Councilor Nolan mentioned, and it has to do around the theme of proportion. I want to make sure that part of this conversation is, this is my assumption, and I didn't see it in the language, but I want to make it clear that the proportional distribution to each of the counties is not on the table.
I have not included that in my recommendation. The Metro Council has the authority to review the allocations.
Yeah, I want to make it clear that I would not support the changing of the proportion to the counties, and the counties have the flexibility to respond to their communities, and however the counties can distribute that money with their community jurisdictions, their districts. I think that there are multiple ways that we can work on housing production, but I just wanted to just confirm that from my perspective. Thanks.
So I just, to wrap this up, I want to personally thank Marisa and the team at Metro and all the stakeholders, as everybody else has done. But I think this is the work that I think that we originally wanted to do prior to putting this on the measure on the ballot in 2019. But it was an emergency and people felt like it needed to go immediately. And so a lot of the details weren't worked out, and it was a rough start. I think our counties are doing an amazing job now that they have built programs over the last couple of years to be able to put out the services that were envisioned at the time. But it has shown us all that we can do better, that there are holes and gaps of things that weren't discussed prior to putting it on the ballot in 2019 that now need to be worked out. So a lot of people have been helped, but more people can be helped. And I think that's where we're headed with this entire conversation. And thank you for sticking to that bigger belief that this is, again, a lot of work. It's a lot of work by a lot of people over the last 3 to 4 years to get this program up, get it going, get people off the street, not allow them to fall into homelessness in the first place. And that it's now in the tens of thousands of people that have been helped. But we find ourselves at this transition point with the affordable housing bond measure coming to a close and needing to be innovative and work within the constraints of where we're at and the gaps that we found that we need to basically fill. So I think you've done a great job. We've done a great job as a region having this conversation, and thank you for setting it up for being open to hearing all of the different perspectives on how to get to where we need to go with this. So there is a lot of distrust in government right now, right? And I think that we are doing the right thing in measuring twice, cutting once. In fact, measuring 3 times might even be the appropriate here because we just cut once last time. And I think making sure that we do have a coalition, a complete coalition that really feels like they've not just been heard, but their perspectives are embedded in what we go forward with in May if the council were to choose to do that. Because I think what we need to do is prepare to go to the ballot in May and start working in that direction. Just as Councilor Lewis said, we were working on November and got a good percentage of the way, but there are some last things that we need to think about. So we have challenging conversations ahead, and I'm thinking this council, I am so proud of this council as well for being so supportive of the process that was set up and also for ready to have those hard conversations. And doing the work alongside of our staff to make sure that everybody was understanding of the process and where we were and that we were really truly open. As we move forward, there is a lot of work to be done, and I just want to be on a little bit more on the record as we move forward that there are couple things that you've laid out that we can do almost immediately. And I think it would behoove us to move on those and think about starting a resolution that I can work with the council on to get us as far along as we possibly can, as quickly as we can, to start reducing the unknown unknowns and the known unknowns. So that we've got partners who know where we're headed in the interim. And let's start working on that. And then I think there's a separate resolution in my head that we need to negotiate with our partners, which is the longer term. What do we put to the ballot? And I'm looking at our attorney, and it's a resolution, correct? Not an ordinance.
Council President Peterson and councilors, depending upon what we refer, taxes are done by ordinance. If we're making amendments to our code, that would be by ordinance. The actual referral then happens by resolution. So it can consist of both components.
So in the short term, there might be a resolution and an ordinance. And in the long term, there might be a resolution and an ordinance. Okay, got it. Thank you. Much appreciated. But I do think that also moving in the direction in this immediate next step of what's under our control and dealing with this inflationary issue with the tax rate is something that we should do to start increasing trust with the voters. I think we need to show some sort of first step there, which gets at that also preparing an ordinance to discuss with the council and our stakeholders. So that's how I'm seeing it in my head today. So I think today marks the formal transition from this first amazing step forward to try and figure out not just clarity and transparency and efficiency, but how do we do it all? And I just want to be clear with that too. I think there's been a certain expectation because we haven't had state and federal increases in this area for so long that the SHS has become the focal point at the regional level of solving all the problems. Because while the state has certainly stepped up in small amounts for this region, this has been the largest influx of investment in this area for a very long time. And what I want to make sure we also keep in our heads is this should not be the only thing. There's a myriad of responsibility that needs to be discussed, both at the state level, the federal level, but also, as we pointed out, with the cities. But I think that that comes with the responsibility that we talked about with the last budget and the budget note that we are now going to be working on. And that is the fiscal health of our cities in this region and what they need in order to be partners. Because they do not have the ability to waive SDCs. We have, as a state, decided that growth pays its own way. And because growth has had to pay its own way, growth is not happening. And that's because we have not allowed our cities to do the work that they need to do to actually grow. And so that is the conversation that is like the one even beyond this, that this council needs to, with staff and with our mayors and with our counties, really delve into what are we going to ask for from the state in terms of infrastructure and support? Because it's not all in subsidy. And growth can't pay its own way at this point. We're not growing. So I think we need to be able to have that open discussion with our cities, and we need to support them in a myriad of different ways. But we can't just say at this point, cities, you're on your own, you got to step up. That's not right. The state should be stepping in, the region should be stepping in. We should be a little bit more forceful about what our cities need in order to be able to not just get affordable and low income, but middle income housing out there, because that's what's putting all the pressure on the market. So I think we got a lot of work ahead of us. Some of it is short term, and let's figure out how to make that happen in the short term. And then I think council, I'll come back with Marisa and staff on a recommendation on how to move forward with the preparation for May. If that sounds good with all of you. Seeing nodding heads. Did I miss anything?
No, I don't think so. Thank you so much for the wonderful discussion, and happy to support you and the council in any way in preparing.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. As was mentioned, we have two big conversations today. And thank you to all the staff who are here on the housing. If you could quietly leave the room, we still have a whole council meeting to continue to do. I appreciate it. We've got the Urban Growth Management Draft Urban Growth Report next. This year, council directed staff to continue implementing. I'm going to ask you to leave quietly. Thank you. Implementing work program for the 2024 Urban Growth Management Decision. So far this year, staff have shared findings along the way from the demographic and economic regional forecast and the capacity analysis. We also heard a presentation from the city of Sherwood about their expansion proposal, the only proposal for expansion we received this cycle. Staff will today present the draft 2024 Urban Growth Report as council continues to consider the need for expansion, and if so, the conditions for doing so. And I think council, I just want to highlight that comment that I just made. I really would like to hear from the counselors today, your initial thoughts on conditions if we were to do an urban growth boundary expansion out of all of this. And I think that's part of what we can talk about next then, because I think it's going to be a real important aspect of all this. So presenting the draft 2024 Urban Growth Report today, we have Erin Key. I was going to do it right. Thank you. Key, Urban Policy and Development Manager. Ted Reed, Principal Regional Planner, and I guess I'm kicking it over to Catherine Charlo to be able to introduce. Thanks.
Thank you, Council President Peterson. We are really appreciative of the opportunity to be here to talk about this, and I think it's somewhat fitting that you spent the first part of the morning talking about housing and growth in a very hands-on, tangible, short-term way, shortish term. And now we're going to take a step back and look at the other part of the responsibility that Metro has around growth, including housing, and look longer term at the urban growth boundaries. So we've come to you a couple times, as Council President Peterson said, with a couple pieces of information along the way. Just a quick reminder that Metro's responsibility for determining whether or not to expand the urban growth boundary into urban reserve areas is a function of state law. We're limited by that state law in what types of decisions we can make. You'll hear more about that from Aaron and Ted. What we wanted to do today is frame up both the limitations there and the opportunities there, and share with you all data and information that helps you make some choices that you'll need to make over the coming months, and helps our COO make choices that she'll need to make. So foundationally, that's where we are. We've since coming to you, we had been in a technical phase for the past year or so. We are shifting now to a technical analysis phase, to a policy considerations phase, and it's a real shift. What the urban growth report represents that we're going to present today is essentially the documentation of that technical phase and the basis upon which you all can make your policy decisions. And I include the COO in the you all here. You obviously have important roles to play, all of you. So the urban growth report, or UGR, as we will refer to it shorthand, will be released today for public comment of about a month. Feedback from your conversation today will be included in that comment period, as will feedback from various partners and the public. You will have a chance to see this report again in September. And in the meantime, your COO will come out with a recommendation building on the technical information in this report. Others will weigh in. You'll have time to consider it yourselves. And we, of course, as staff, are available to do whatever type of interpretation, both here today, but also in between now and the next time you talk about this. So thanks again for the opportunity to speak with you. I'm going to introduce Aaron Key and Ted Reed to actually present the report.
Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Key, Urban Policy and Development Manager. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm going to kick off the presentation today. So let's go to the first slide. You've seen our schedule before, so I want to highlight again what an exciting day today is. This is the kickoff of the decision-making process and the public review and discussion of all of the information that it's taken us many, many months and many people's contributions to bring together. So we're transitioning from the dark blue line into the orange one, and it's a pretty significant transition. Next slide. Metro's task is looking at the regional needs 20 years into the future. So that future can be forecasted, but it will always be a little uncertain. And that is why this policy discussion is so important to helping you reach a decision, is taking that information, using the urban growth report as a tool to then bring in your thoughts and ideas for the region's needs to ultimately lead to a decision. This slide helps you see the next several months so you can understand how this process lays out, which Catherine explained very generally. Today, later this afternoon, is when the urban growth report will be published on Metro's website and made available to the public. That kicks off the public comment period that will run through August 4th. Also this month, the city of Sherwood is coming to CORE to share information about their plans with CORE. And then in August, there will be the release of the COO recommendation. that then can be used both by council and by MPAC and MTAC in conversation and recommendations that are scheduled to happen in September. So that's when council will also hold a public hearing on that COO recommendation, leading into then the council direction and first hearing and final decision at the end of this year. So that's how we are laying out this process to get to the decision that's ahead of you. Next slide.
On this slide,
Can we, okay, go ahead.
Can we go back to that slide?
we have appealed with urgency to some of our governmental partners who have reasonable public comment periods. And it seems to me that we're not abiding by our own standards here by having less than 30 days public comment on a critical document. I would suggest we extend that. I don't see any reason why it can't be extended to 45 days.
Well, I can explain a little bit about how we ended up at August 4th. It's really important that those public comments are able to be absorbed and used by Marisa in making her recommendation later in the month. And so part of the reason of closing it at that date is to give us time to bring all that information together, summarize it, and provide enough time for it to really affect that COO recommendation.
With all due respect, I think we are disrespecting the public when we prioritize our convenience over theirs.
So
Thank you.
can you remind me when the final decision has to be legally made?
December.
End of December?
Council President Peterson, we're tentatively scheduled for December 5th for a second reading of the ordinance.
And what would happen if we added 15 days?
15 days. Well, we may, I can't speak for the council, whether you'd be present for that close to the holidays.
I'm sorry,
Yeah, I
I
think-
can't hear you.
So that's up to the council. That's your prerogative to schedule later in December.
Okay. Yes, Counselor.
Just the public comment period here in
Yeah, yeah.
July and August.
Just to follow up, is
We
there,
absorb the 15 days.
was the,
Yeah, let's not, I'm trying to get the information and then I think we can make a recommendation out of the work session.
was there a reason the August 14th date was chosen as a release date for the CO's recommendation? Since council is generally on recess and
Yeah.
it seems there's some flexibility in that.
Yeah.
to that date.
I see where you're going, but it isn't a break for MTAC and MPAC. Who are, well, MPAC it will be, but in August, we're preparing for presentation to MTAC about the COO recommendation so that they have chance to review the COO recommendation at their August meeting and then to make a recommendation to MPAC before MPAC's recommendation in September. So
Right.
it's harder to see on this, but there's time between each of these to process the information, get it into a packet, and make sure it's available to the group that needs to make a recommendation to council. And as Ted pointed out, you could consider extending it on the back end in December. You could push out 2 weeks there. Part of the reason of scheduling a decision that needs to be made by the end of the month earlier in December is that you might want more time. So that pushing it just eliminates that possibility, but perhaps there's enough time worked in for those discussions already. So those are the things to consider.
Appreciate it. I'm just gonna let to our attorney. Is there anything that would happen if the second reading was in January or the first reading was in January? Are we-
So I'm gonna, thank you, President Peterson. I'm gonna ask Roger Alfred to come up to do the specific timelines because we are mandated in terms of our review by state law. I want to clarify, I think, as he's coming up, that we sort of do this in 2 stages and there's an open public comment opportunity kind of throughout the whole process. So the stage that staff is speaking to, where public comment deadline is August 4th, that's to receive public comment into the COO's recommendation that she will be issuing later that month and in September. Then, but throughout the period up until the time that council makes its decision, we do receive and can receive public comment. So that may not influence council's desire to extend that initial public comment period, but I want to be clear that that's not the only opportunity for the public to comment during the course of this policymaking, decision for council.
That was gonna be my next question. Thank you.
So Roger, can you answer the more specific, what would occur if council, say, for example, was not to be prepared to take final action on the UGR until, say, the second week of January, just as a proxy?
Yeah, sorry, Roger Alfred, Office of Metro Attorney. We are required to take this action every 6 years. However, my hunch is that if we went 2 weeks over, it's not like that would be the end of the world. And I doubt that DLCD would attempt to issue some sort of an enforcement order against us or anything like that. So, I think a 2-week delay would not upset the apple cart here. And I would also like to just officially agree with what Carrie just said, and make sure we understand that it's not that public comment period. It's an official formal public comment period, but it's not, and that's used for purposes of informing the COO recommendation. But this is a legislative ordinance, and public comments can be received all the way up to the date of the actual adoption.
Yeah.
And that the draft urban growth report remains a draft until the end of the process when council adopts it or has a final. So the report doesn't become final on August 4th either. There is more time to make adjustments.
So, I guess I'd like to just pursue what would happen if there was a 2-week delay, or not even delay, extension.
Yeah.
I don't want to make it a negative, because it's a positive. But if that then impacts, the impact other stakeholder conversations that now we're in February, March, April, I don't know what happens because of that. I mean, I think this is a really good question because 30 days does seem, land use law is regulated by 180-day rule. But so 30 days seems short, but yeah.
We're just huddling here. We need to do a little
And
bit of.
we may not get the answer today. That's
Right,
fine.
that's
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
was
yeah.
just gonna say. We need to do some very careful schedule calculation. The request is heard. It's helpful to know that extension possibly for a second reading into the new year could be possible. So if we could have.
Right, is to say a second reading. Let's say it's adoption in the first or second month of the year. And I guess
Thank
what I'd want to do is if we decided to go down this route is just make sure that we send a letter to DLCD saying, FYI, it's all scheduled out. We just wanted to extend public comment.
Thank you. So if we could have a little time to just look at the schedule and get back to you all with the answer to make sure that we can make it work in a logical way that may include a later consideration or discussion than early December for you all as well. So.
And then I think just, I'm going to look to see if there's any way to add clarity to our communications that public comment does not close. It is it is open until the actual date of whatever, we finally land on, whether it's December 5th or whether it's whatever, right? That public comment is open until then, so that just, it's very clear that there's no closing and door closed. I think that would be helpful too.
Thank you. Yes, that's absolutely something we will do no matter what. And we will look at this and get back to you all as soon as possible. And in addition to saying yes there and looking, I do also just want to make sure that we all recognize that the public comment moment here is on this particular report, which is not a recommendation in and of itself. So I think you all understand that, but just to make sure there is not only more public comment all the way up to the decision, but will be comment on the recommendation as well to inform you all. But we will go back and look at it and get back to you as soon as possible. And irrespective of that, we'll correct or amend the communication about ongoing public
Maybe during
communication.
COO recommendations on Thursday, if you can do it that fast, we could get some direction on whether we want to extend or not.
Sounds good. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Sorry, big.
Well, maybe,
Thank you.
I think the next section is very relevant to the conversation. So next slide, please, and then go ahead and go to the next one. Perfect. Thank you. So we have.
Oh, I'm sorry, we have
That's all right.
counselors with
I
questions.
just, I wanted to clarify one thing. Since MPAC is not meeting in September at this time, believe they canceled their September meeting. So you have MTAC, which is meeting, right? MPAC is not.
August. MTAC meets in August. MPAC will have 2 meetings in September.
Right.
Currently.
So what is to prevent MTAC from having a special meeting to consider CO's recommendation at a time in early September?
That's a possibility we can consider as
So
well.
I think you
So
should
thank
consider
you.
that. That would give the CO a little longer to consider public comment and so forth. And it may avoid a long-term delay into the new year in some sense.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll look at that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Counselor Lewis?
Sure, I think it's worth noting that on that previous slide, it said the beginning of comment was July 9th. That is today. And I think we should be extremely clear to people listening in. Please start commenting
Thank you.
immediately.
Yeah.
The other
Yes.
thing is
Yes.
the date that was on that slide of August 4th was a Sunday, which feels a little arbitrary because I don't know who here works on a Sunday. I do. My counselor to my left does, but nobody else. So let's just be reasonable and move forward with what we can do. I looked at the December calendar. I bet we could bump 1, maybe even 2 Thursdays. But I want people to listen in knowing that the public comment period, no matter what happens to the end date, commences today.
Thank you.
As soon as they get a copy.
Right.
It will be on the website this afternoon. So tune in.
All right, thank you. Moving on.
Great. So now I just wanted to summarize and talk a bit about all of the engagement that has been going on for over a year now. We have been regularly providing updates to our standing committees that you see listed on this slide. We've talked a little bit about Metro's Technical Advisory Committee and Metro's Policy Advisory Committee. Unlike years in the past, when a lot of this technical analysis was coming together here at the office amongst staff working together, we've been talking about the methodologies and sharing early results with all of these groups all along the way as a way of, well, really taking some of the excitement of the UGR out of its release today, because many people have seen all of its pieces and understand what it says already. But to some, it will be new and it will be an exciting opportunity to provide good comment. We had a UG Urban Growth Report roundtable, so a roundtable of people with very diverse perspectives and professions there, learning again about the methodology and some early results to provide good feedback about that Urban Growth Report process and to make sure that people understood what was in it and had chance to ask questions before it was released, and then having a shorter amount of time to do that. So all of that has been going on. We've worked with a youth cohort, which has been a really exciting process of working with a small group of youth to help them learn about planning and the urban growth boundary process and to follow along in the development of this urban growth report so that they can be in a better position to hopefully come to you with their thoughts and ideas if they choose to do that as individuals. Next slide. But it's not just Metro standing committees. We've been out seeing a lot of other committees as well. In fact, we have counted over 90 presentations and meetings that we've participated in through this UGB process. And we have just a few more this week. In fact, we're meeting with the Home Builders Association later this week, and the WCCC TAC will be later this week. So these presentations continue and have been a big part of the engagement on this process. Next slide. There's also been a very important technical review. These forecasts are places where we have the opportunity to engage our local professionals in making sure that we're approaching this in all the smartest ways and bringing together information that is cutting edge and that is most accurate. So we have regularly pulled together a group of planners and professionals from around the region that we call the Land Use Technical Advisory Group. They reviewed our methodology before we started doing the work, and then reviewed results, and also looked at maps, understanding their local community and giving us feedback about capacity and about forecasts for their local community, so we could build those into the regional forecast. We also brought together a review panel of economists and demographers to check our forecasts, both in housing and in economics, to make sure that we were on track with the national trends and with the understanding of folks outside of Metro. And of course, the Metro Technical Advisory Committee is a group specifically brought together to provide technical advice to MPAC, and we've been keeping them appraised as well. Thank you very much. Move to the next slide, and I think is where I'm going to pass it to Ted.
Okay. Thank you, Council President Peterson, councilors. So I'm going to quickly get into some of the results of the work, because as Aaron has noted, we've been talking about how we've done this work for several months now in various venues. And I think it's helpful to reiterate what Catherine mentioned at the outset, that there is a housing crisis in our region, much like the rest of the nation. There's no question about that. We have a different task in this work, though, in answering the question of, is there a need for more land to support housing development over the long term? So those are the kinds of questions we've been asking in this work. So jumping right into the housing side of things, you'll recall that we had three basic scenarios that we tested, because we wanted to acknowledge there's uncertainty in this work about what the future may hold in terms of the mix of housing that might be in demand. So just to quickly go through what those three scenarios are. The first one is following in footsteps, and that's essentially that in the future, households will make choices about their housing types that are very similar to their predecessors. More towards single unit detached housing. And then as we move towards the right in these scenarios, basically we're getting a heavier mix of middle housing. So those are townhouses, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, cottage clusters, those types of choices, and multifamily housing such as apartments and condos. So the strong urban markets is the other end of the spectrum. Essentially think of the kind of housing that got built over the last 10 years, where there was a very heavy urban demand for housing, a lot of apartment construction. This scenario basically envisions that continuing to happen in the future. And then in the middle, we have a new normal that's a blend of these two, that yes, some people will make choices like their predecessors about their housing, but will maybe not to the same extent see a shift towards strong urban markets. Moving on to the next slide, please. If I could focus you on columns 1, 2, and 4. These are basically the scenarios I just described. The following in footsteps, number 1, number 2 is the new normal, and number 4 is strong urban market. I'll come back to number 3 in a moment. These are the housing mixes, the demand for housing types that we envision under these three scenarios. So you see in dark blue, the multi-family housing, so things like apartments and condos. Middle housing, again, townhouses, duplexes, et cetera, in yellow. And then in light blue, single unit detached housing. So again, as you move from scenario 1, 2 to 4, you see decreasing shares of single unit detached housing, increasing shares of middle housing and multifamily housing. So on number 3, this is we're going to get into this in the results. Basically, what we've done is we've done 2 variations on that new normal scenario. When we compare that demand under new normal to our a couple different variations on how much capacity for various housing types we see. So that's why that housing mix is the same in scenarios 2 and 3, but you'll see the differences in the results of the gap analysis on the next slide, please. Okay, so here are the same four scenarios. Under the following in footsteps scenario, the first one, we have a slight surplus for both single unit detached and middle housing, as well as a slight surplus for multifamily housing. This is because of slower population growth. People are making choices similar to their predecessors. So just generally with that slower growth, there's enough growth capacity to accommodate this scenario inside the current urban growth boundary. Second scenario, again, is our new normal where we see some shift towards middle housing away from single unit detached, as well as a bit more mix of apartments and condos. Under this scenario, we also assumed our baseline capacity, which was the result of extensive modeling that we did. That modeling showed a lot of promise for middle housing. So often in that work, we would see that middle housing would prevail in zones that allow single unit detached housing as well. So we got a lot of middle housing capacity out of this, and what we have as a result is a surplus for middle housing and single unit detached, as well as a slight deficit for multifamily housing. That's combined with our baseline forecast, so it's most likely forecast. Our third scenario is the same demand assumptions as what I just described, number two. It's the baseline forecast, same housing mix, but here, based on feedback that we got from local jurisdictions, some of our suburban jurisdictions saw our preliminary capacity results and that market shift towards middle housing, and noted that their local experience is a bit different, that they expected more of that residential capacity go to single unit detached housing. So that's what is reflected here in the scenario 3. And we end up with a slight deficit for single unit detached and middle housing, and this slight surplus for multifamily housing. Fourth scenario, this is strong urban market and high growth forecast. Along with a high growth forecast, we would expect that would come from increased in-migration to the region. Typically, migrants into our region are younger, so they're going to be seeking apartments, so that's why you see that strong demand for apartments, and how we end up with that deficit for multifamily housing there, as well as a surplus for the single unit detached and middle housing. Next slide, please. Okay, so moving on to the employment side of things, I'm going to talk about two categories, both commercial land and industrial land. So first, on the commercial side, we go through a number of steps to translate our regional forecast into demand for land. The baseline forecast here, when we compare the capacity of 480 acres inside the urban growth boundary today, and with demand in the future, we have a slight deficit for commercial land, for commercial employment. So these are things like office uses, retail uses. Really, the deficit here is a consequence of just simply not having a lot of capacity to begin with inside the urban growth boundary with that 480 acres. Bigger deficit if we assume a higher growth forecast, and a surplus if we assume low growth forecast. Next slide, please. So industrial lands. We sent out our capacity estimates for local review. Through that local review, we identified almost 6,000 acres of industrial land, buildable acres, inside the urban growth boundary today. So when we hold that up against the demand that we see based on the forecast, we have a surplus across all of three scenarios. A sizable surplus under the baseline forecast. This is acreage in aggregate. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that means to come to the conclusion that we have a surplus in aggregate. So these are basically the cumulative acres inside the urban growth boundary. Some of these parcels are quite small. The average parcel size for buildable lands, industrial buildable lands inside our urban growth boundary is 3.8 acres. Median parcel size is 1.7 acres. Those are important for our economy. They serve an important purpose. Those small sites are in high demand, but they don't serve the whole economy. So we looked at this question of site characteristics, including site size, a bit more closely to give you more information to support your decision. Next slide, please. We're also wanting to be responsive to the council's policy and your framework plan that establishes that you want to maintain a sufficient supply of industrial sites over 50 acres. So we looked at this question a bit more closely. The region's inventory of large industrial sites currently inside the urban growth boundary. So large here means 25 plus buildable acres. The tiering is a reflection of development readiness, with tier 1 being most ready to develop, tier 3 taking a longer period of time. Tier 1 is likely to be development ready in the next 6 months. Tier 2 is likely to be development ready in 7 to 30 months. Tier 3 is 30 plus months to get to development readiness. Typical types of challenges or transportation improvements to serve these sites. Wetland mitigation, brownfield cleanup, site assembly, city annexation and zoning. Those are the kinds of actions that need to take place to get these large sites to a state of readiness. And if we look at what has changed since we last updated this inventory in 2017, 15 of the large industrial sites that were in that 2017 inventory have developed in the intervening years. 6 of those sites that developed are over 50 acres in size. So this gives us some indication of demand for large sites. Things may change in the future, so we don't necessarily know that we'll perpetually have that sort of demand in the future, but this is one piece of information. So when we look at 50 acres and larger, we find 10 of these sites inside the urban growth boundary today. 2 of those have overlays that restrict their use either for marine industrial uses or for because of overlays for airport considerations. So that leaves the region with 8 sites that are 50 acres plus. Next slide, please. So this is difficult to forecast objectively what the demand for large sites is going to be over the next 20 years. We did look at the work that the Oregon Semiconductor Task Force has been doing over the last couple of years to get some sense for this. This is statewide, what that task force established as the need. 2 sites of 500 plus acres, 4 sites of 50 to 100 acres, and at least 8 sites of 15 to 35 acres. This is predicated on a repetition of the kind of high-tech manufacturing growth that the state saw in the 1990s. If that were to happen again, this would be the need. So we provide this to you along with the large site inventory to give a bit more nuance to this question of industrial land's need. Next slide, please. So as Council President Peterson mentioned at the outset, we have one proposal for an expansion in this decision cycle. City of Sherwood has made that proposal for the Sherwood West Urban Reserve, and part of that plan contains an employment area to the north that does provide some opportunities for large industrial sites, either a couple of 50 plus acre sites or one site that's 100 or so acres. These lands are relatively flat, which can accommodate high-tech manufacturing uses, and they have relative proximity to existing high-tech clusters. Next slide, please. So we're wrapping up policy options, and this is part where the council gets to take the reins. Next slide, please. So what this analysis tells us is that the council has basically a latitude to determine whether there's a need to expand the urban growth boundary for housing and jobs. You have the option of concluding that there's a need for no expansion or a need for an expansion that you could accommodate with the proposed expansion from Sherwood. And if you are to consider an expansion, you probably want to consider some conditions of approval as well to achieve the housing mix and employment land protections that you may want. I believe.
Next slide.
Next slide, yeah.
And another slide. So I'm just going to wrap this up and remind everybody who's listening online and all of our council members that this is the beginning of the discussion period. Public comment will begin officially when the urban growth report is put on the website this afternoon, but it really continues through the month of July with comments on the urban growth report. But there are opportunities to provide feedback and testimony in writing or at meetings all through the rest of the year. And we will be really interested, we will be bringing back you this feedback that we hear from the public so that you can use that in your deliberations as well. So if we go to the last slide, I will share just the questions that we put in the worksheet for you. The second one is what President Peterson talked about, wanting to hear your thoughts and ideas regarding potential conditions of approval if you made the decision to expand in Sherwood. But in general, I think it's very helpful for us as staff and for Marisa and for each other to hear your thoughts and ideas about the information you have and the decision you have ahead of you. So I'll stop talking and turn it over to you.
Thank you. Counselors, why don't we just, I think it would be helpful to staff and myself if we could just go down the line and maybe talk about which of the scenarios you feel is important to really talk about, along with the conditions of approval that you might be thinking about at this point. So I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but if we just go straight down the line, if I start with Counselor Simpson.
Thank you, Council President Peterson. Thank you for this report. If I can remember correctly, at least on the terms of, if we can bring up that last slide.
Could we bring up the slide with the scenarios? Probably the first one would be where it mentions all four would be best.
With that, I think if I remember correctly, our presentation from the city of Sherwood, Bruce came in, he gave us their concept. I think for me, it goes back to question 2, or the recommendation 2 is like mixing up those housing types. I think it was all market rate housing, and we face a crisis right now of affordability, and to put all your eggs into market rate housing, I think is short-sighted. And then also for me, again, the big piece is transit, some adequate transit planning. If it's going to be a work hub, corridor, center, whatever you want to call it, we got to make sure transit is embedded in there. I think those are, when we had these internal conversations, were my 2 things that hung me up on this. So.
Thank you. With the absence of Council President Peterson, she did say that you all should just keep going down the line, so.
Councilor Rosenthal.
No, I would prefer to go last, but I will make some comments. First of all, on the general thing, if you look at the history of Oregon growth, it's highly erratic. So projecting forward when some smooth line projections is, let's just say, optimistic at best. So we have to realize that there's a great deal of uncertainty in these projections going forward. And I appreciate the thoroughness and the detail that have gone into these kinds of projections, that I think they take into account all the right kinds of factors. But Oregon has shown itself to be relatively unpredictable. So I guess we can hope for the best and not do that. As regarding the Sherwood proposal, one of the difficulties is building affordable housing, building middle income housing. As everybody knows, I mean, we can provide money to help build deeply affordable housing, 60 or 30% AMI kind of housing. The difficulty is in the 120, 130 range, but 100% range of AMI. That's difficult because there's only a few builders that specialize in that, and it's very hard to provide the appropriate incentives, and cities have trouble requiring that. And once you get into market rate that where you don't have subsidies, where you don't have direct income subsidies, it's much more difficult. Market rate, single family. My impression is that the cities can provide some incentives. As was pointed out earlier, there's some limitations on the state in terms of systems development. All the cities in my district have been growing rather dramatically. So I don't, in terms of the upper market rate, it doesn't seem to have been a big constrict, but getting that so that it's reduced so that you can get the worker force housing. One of the problems we have with this regional development is that considering transportation is we want to build housing closer to where we have the need. The industrial area in the southwest of Washington County is a fairly large area, and it's been growing. And there's been a lot of efforts on the part of all three cities to expand their industrial usage and their support for the high-tech industry. But our analysis is region-wide and doesn't really specifically have tools, as far as I understand it, to encourage growth in the areas closest to where we have the job developments. So I think we have to, that is something that is just sort of part of the process. And it's an area that we just really can't quite compensate for in terms of energy, in terms of efficiency, in terms of climate change. We want to encourage growth of housing in areas where we are going to have jobs. So that's one of the reasons why I find the Sherwood proposal interesting, because they are proposing for an expansion of the right size of industrial lands, that it could create a fair number of jobs. They've been fairly successful at that in the past. There's quite a few developments in one of the region's areas, just got some more money from the state and the feds in terms of grants for infrastructure for chips manufacturing. So I think things have been fairly well thought out. I think it's important to consider whether it's, and this is a difficult question, whether it's important to add a large tranche of land at one point in time so that you can plan the entire area and deal with transportation, deal with infrastructure, deal with the corridors, and deal with industrial lands at the same time, or whether it is more appropriate to sort of piecemeal it according to the immediate needs. I would tend to go with the former concept. So, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about that. I've attended meetings with people who are very leery of this expansion in the Sherwood area. But overall, I would have to say that I think the plans and the purpose has been well thought out. The problem comes in, we have a concept plan, but making the concept plan, which strikes me as fairly well thought out, making that actually come to reality is going to be difficult. And providing the right incentives to maintain the industrial lands and to increase the density above what historically has been true in Sherwood is going to be a difficult aspect. And I'll leave it at that for now.
So Counselor, can I just try and summarize? What I heard is you're interested in looking at the Sherwood expansion for both housing and industrial.
I'm sorry.
You're interested in looking at a Sherwood expansion in both housing and industrial. Is that the bottom line? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify.
I think well, it depends. Employment lands, let's just say employment lands, not necessarily. Some people think of industrial as foundries, and we don't include foundries necessarily.
Okay, Counselor Nolan.
I got a lot of stuff. Some questions first.
Okay.
I haven't read every detail of your report. I've read the executive summary, but I've got some questions, and forgive me if they're answered in the report. Your public engagement, you listed some of the groups you engaged and then said you had 80 or 90 presentations. Can you tell me which of those presentations were focused on conservation groups, particularly BIPOC-led conservation or environmental groups, seniors, and advocates for low-income housing, particularly among BIPOC leaders. And if it's in the book, just give me the page. If it's not, let me know who you've talked with.
Counselor Nolan, we'll get back to you with a complete list, but generally speaking, the groups that we went to tended to be government organizations, interest groups that traditionally have been interested in growth management and land use topics. But we'll get back to you with a more precise answer.
Thanks.
Many of
I mean,
the-
You've been to a lot of them, and that's great. That's an outreach that is really laudable, but I'm curious about who they included and perhaps who they didn't include.
Some of the interests that you listed were involved in the roundtable as well.
Yes. If I might, your map, Ted, about industrial sites, green, blue, and red, I think were the colors. Only went so far as tier 3, which you defined as ready to develop within 30 months.
Or greater.
But we're planning for 20 years. So my question is, what consideration did you give, or did any of the consultants give, to the potential for repurposing of industrial land? 20 years, the world will evolve pretty dramatically about how we do manufacturing. And would there be more capacity if we looked at land that is underutilized but appropriate or zoned for industrial, that could be repurposed more cheaply or more easily than, you know, steep terrain or something like that, that I've heard some of your consultants mention?
Councilor Nolan, most of the land on that map of large sites is vacant land. So you are correct that there may be other sources of growth capacity over the long term that we're not anticipating here through repurposing of existing buildings that is not included on that map.
Okay. And one more question, and then we can talk about my leanings. During one of the roundtable meetings, you all took a pop quiz, is the best way I can describe it, of the people in the audience about what they thought trends in, I think it was focused almost exclusively on housing development were. And people were pretty surprised at what the answers were compared to what their guesses had been, particularly around the mix of uses, whether it was single family detached, cottage or middle housing, and conventional multifamily. What I'm interested in is, as I'm looking at the three, we're going to stay the path that's been there, or there's going to be some new normal, or there's going to be more intense urban development. It would be helpful to have the information that was presented in that roundtable. And I suspect, although my colleagues on the council are really up to speed on all of this, I was surprised, and I pay a lot of attention to land use. If we haven't shared that yet, I think it would be really useful. And for the record here, can Ted or Erin, can you give a synopsis of it?
Yeah, let me try, and Ted can hopefully come up with some of the percentages while I'm talking. But the purpose of this, we came up with an engaging activity to get folks' minds in the room. We have about 30 people who serve on the roundtable, and we wanted to get their minds thinking about not just their experience with what they see in their environment in terms of housing and where they've lived in their life, but to think about how things might be different than their own experience and kind of open their minds, so then we could have this discussion about those scenarios and what the future might look like. So that was the purpose of the conversation. And one of the things we talked about was the types of, as you said, the types of housing in the urban growth boundary. And I think one of the things that was surprising to people was that they overestimated the amount of multifamily housing and underestimated the amount of single-family housing that we have built in the region. Did that give you enough time to find numbers?
I actually, anticipating this question, I had it in front of me.
Really smart guy, or I'm too obvious.
No, it's just a good question, Counselor. So over the last decade, about 56% of the new housing built in the urban growth boundary has been multifamily housing. So that lines up with that scenario that it was strong urban market. It's basically the last 10 years happened again and again, that we keep achieving that high rate of multifamily housing. What is different looking forward is the introduction of middle housing. In the last 10 years, about 10% of the new housing that's been built in the urban growth boundary has been middle housing. You'll recall under some of those scenarios that share increases because it is a new option, and a lot of our modeling found that it was in fact profitable for builders to build middle housing, so duplexes, triplexes, townhouses, particularly townhouses, I believe, given that opportunity that they would take that opportunity and build those housing types.
So to how I'm reacting and understand, it's not fully formed reaction because it's a newly released document. I looked at it last week, but I haven't really absorbed it. That says to me that preferences, maybe not ideals, but preferences and choices are already moving toward a more urban development scenario. And I suspect a lot of that is related to cost of housing, whether you're buying a home or renting it. And we know from some of the discussions your development consultants have mentioned that profit potential influences what they prefer to build. If they can make more profit per acre by building a McMansion than by building townhouses, they're going to lean toward building a single-family detached home or a few single-family detached homes. So somewhere in this conversation, since we're not limited to only looking at acres on the ground, but what either conditions or incentives we can offer to move that profit incentive to fill the gap that Counselor Simpson, everybody has acknowledged. The gap, if there is one in housing, is in workforce housing. It's in homes available to families at 90 to 120% of median income. Folks in the top quartile of income don't have a problem buying or renting a home, mostly buying. Even in the top third of the system, our focus should be on housing of people around the median income. And I hope that we'll find a way to measure the need, not just for any old housing unit, but for ones that people can afford, people who live here already. I want to echo mentions that both Counselor Simpson and Counselor Rosenthal made about transportation, that not just in the overall assessment of whether the current urban growth boundary has capacity to meet housing and employment needs, that be considered with specific look at transportation infrastructure. That really wasn't a concept that was high on the priority list back in the 1970s when under Senate Bill 100, we established urban growth boundaries. But I think 50 years on, it's something we really need to pay attention to. And that particularly goes to where we might site or choose to cite any expansions. Because if growth is going to continue to pay its way, Madam President, then transportation has to be part of what it pays its way to delivering. And my final comment is, I still need to think about what's in this report in the context of things we know are unsettled now that could change our evaluation. And I'm thinking specifically about supersiting of manufacturing facilities under recent state statute, and I don't remember the number. What if the state came in and approved a 500-acre manufacturing site to be annexed to an urban growth boundary in the metropolitan region? That would pretty dramatically change our view of what we need in terms of employment land. Perhaps less significant, but not trivial, is also, is it 1537 that allows cities to annex one time without justification up to 50 acres? And what would happen? How would it affect our evaluation if 1 or 2 or 3 cities in the metro area exercise that? So in terms of where I'm leaning toward following the trend that purchasers and developers have already set in motion, which is more toward urban development, urban scale development. And I'm yet to be convinced, given those potential changes that we don't have control of and that won't be decided before December or January, I haven't been convinced that we do need additional land within the urban growth boundary, because the research we've done ourselves suggests that we can meet the needs that are reflected in the forecasts we've done for population and for employment. I'm open. I want to hear data. I want to look at analysis, but I haven't been convinced yet.
Oh, got a book. Thanks. Councilor Gonzalez.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to my mind, if you would ask me 8 years ago if I was excited to talk about urban growth reports, my answer would not be what it is now. So yeah, 6 years on the Metro Council will do that to you. So thank you for the report. And you know, we've had a few conversations here, a work session about this subject, and I'm excited to just chime in, add my energy, my thoughts as well. And probably comes at no surprise to folks around this table that I am in support of growth in housing and employment lands. I think with the report, what I've seen, and I was able to do a quick skim through with the draft that we were sent, as well as the executive summary, is that, you know, there are a few baselines that really give us, as you mentioned, the latitude to me, determine the next 20 years of our region. And acknowledging first on the housing side that we have a historic underproduction of units, and acknowledging the need for 150,000 more units over the next 20 years. As a YIMBY, I guess you could say, I'm all housing, all types, all prices, all neighborhoods. That is my bottom line. And when it comes, and I know we have some of our peers from Sherwood here, so I want to make sure that communicate my expectations, I guess, as well, as we go through this process and as we approach a December decision, that we need to see. I want to say this right. We need to make sure that we're getting the most bang for our buck as a region for the number of units that we can deliver there. I think that's going to be in the conditions that we explore. And I, you know, from the conversations, the tours, reading the proposal, I think that there's still room for us to turn up the dial on the number of units. So I just want to come out as one, someone that is in support of the proposal, also recognizing that we need to go a little farther, maybe just farther in general, remove the little. And in terms of in industrial lands and economic development, I sit on some committees here on behalf of the council, West Side Economic Alliance, so track this issue, being a West Side rep, and conversations with folks at that table and others. There's a general acknowledgement in the industry that we need more industrial land. It's a conversation that's come here multiple times, and I want to make sure that in this proposal that we have the right conditions, if we are to add that, to make sure that what I understood from the report, I want to go back to the report, is that there is a need for specific types of industrial land. And I want those conditions to really protect that type. I don't want to reference other examples in the past where potentially the regional outcomes have not lived up to the highest and best use of what we would anticipate premium agricultural land in the metro area would be. And so I want to make sure, and I know that Sherwood has communicated very high ambitions and goals, and I have full faith. But I also know that our responsibility as a Metro Council is to really think through that. So whether it's jobs, wages, those things, the usual things, and the protection of those 50 acres plus sites, which is what I'm understanding is the need. So working and exploring those conditions is going to be really important to me as we go through this process. I think this last comment that I'm going to make is acknowledging the report and the hard work done by staff on that report. Just my personal beliefs as the counselor and with my role here, I see, a region that desperately needs more housing, our region that is asking for more catalytic economic opportunity to help our region rise in prominence in terms of all of the benefits, all of the livability that we want to deliver. That requires an economic base. And for us to continue to invest in that across every single county, I think that's what the report shows us. And lastly, if there's going to be housing production in this state, selfishly, I want it to be within the Metro Service District. We have the best transit in the state, the best infrastructure, the best park system. I mean, maybe we won't get into competition with Bend on that, but we have a natural ecosystem here of values, and we should want those values to continue here. Housing is going to be built, whether it's inside or outside the UGB. I would rather find ways to encourage and incentivize the right level of growth and investment that we need instead of putting the brakes up. That's my take, and look forward to working with everyone here to find the right conditions to do that. And I think that answers the question quite plainly. What scenario I want us to explore and follow through on, but most importantly, work with our partners in Sherwood to really understand where we can turn up that dial, because that dial has to go up a little bit higher on affordability, on density, on units. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thanks so much. I really appreciate the work that's gone into this, not only working with folks at our stakeholder advisory group, but also working with experts in the field, demographers, and statisticians, because I think it's important that we understand that we're in the headwinds of some national trends. And as much as we like to, say things are done the Oregon way, and we are looking at the region based off of the region's previous trends, I think there are some national things happening that I really want to pay attention, because the new normal is still shifting out from under us. So I think I do fall into the new normal scenarios, but think that we don't quite know what we're working with right now for the potential for the next decade. My thoughts when it comes to industrial, I guess when I want a chocolate bar, I don't want to look at a bowl of M&Ms and be told I have plenty of chocolate. And what I'm seeing from the map is that these parcelized and sometimes inadequately spaced acres aren't adding up to that bar of chocolate. And so I am finding that there is a compelling reason to move forward to identify places where we can bring in whole cloth areas that are suitable for the kinds of high paying jobs, high value, sustainable jobs. But I'm not attracted to do that if we don't put conditions where we're gonna get that value. I'm not bringing land in to build more storage units, to be very clear. Then when it comes to housing, I do believe that we have seen numerous types of growth. Housing of all types is necessary. Housing for all people, both those from the region and those we might hope to attract to the region. But we are missing a picture of what affordability means. I think we're looking a lot at supply and demand as affordability. We're looking a lot at housing types as affordability. And we have not yet simply stated that deeply affordable housing is infrastructure that every city must account for and provide, like utilities of water and power. So I would hope that we see a plan or a condition for partnership. No, the city itself does not provide deeply affordable housing, but if we are going to move forward by adding more housing, we can't forget the partnerships that make deeply affordable housing possible. So that's the two conditions that I would be wanting us to explore. One on the industrial side and two on the deeply affordable housing side.
Great, thank you. Councilor Wong.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to the staff for putting all this together. I'll keep my comments a little shorter just because we had such great eloquent remarks from all my colleagues. Just on the scale, I think I'm somewhere in between the new normal, but I'd like to push towards the urban scale where we can. I do think we need to be really thoughtful about adding industrial land to our region. But you know, on a recent trip out to Sherwood, I just want to make sure that if we're adding industrial land, that the housing mix corresponds to that, so that you know, we're not building McMansions for some and then you know, industrial facilities where people would have to probably drive in. So how do we make those two work together? That'd be really important to think through. And all this conversation is also coming to core soon, and I'd be really interested in the recommendations from that committee as well. And I'll leave it at that. I think, I guess to summarize, you know, open to considerations with strong conditions of approval. Thanks.
Great. So what is interesting is that I have been saying that this was the most controversial decision that Metro could potentially make prior to supportive housing service program. It's a little, yeah. And now, partially because of your work over the last year, and partially because it is no longer the most controversial, but it is part and parcel of what we've been talking about. And for those taking shots at home, yes, part and parcel was said already once. Sorry, I'm trying to do better. The conversation we had earlier just totally bleeds for me into this conversation. And the fact that we can do as much as we possibly can to support a program to keep people out of homelessness and to move people out of homelessness. But if people keep falling into homelessness faster, then we can grab them before they fall into homelessness. We will continue to have homelessness. And while that is not completely on housing, is not completely on growing new, really good jobs, Those are two really big parts of the future of this region. And I don't want to have the constriction, as we were talking about earlier, a constriction in the ability of our cities to be able to produce both going forward, because we are in need of both. So I think I lie, and I have been very clear, I think, about being pro consideration of an urban growth boundary expansion, and it looks like it is justified. I think the conditions of approval will be extremely important. I am also going to be on the record that I'm chagrined that we only have one. And that conversation with the cities who have the potential to be able to do an urban growth boundary expansion technically, when we provided the grants 2 years ago and they didn't apply right? And then they didn't make a proposal. Again, is showing the health, our fiscal health of our cities is not good. And I'm just going to keep reemphasizing that, because I don't know when the state legislature is going to actually hear this. And I don't think they're going to hear it until we start actually getting on the rooftop of every city hall with the city mayor. We have land that hasn't been developed because the cities don't have the ability to do it. But we don't have enough land to actually meet the totality of the need for the next 6 years to 20 years. And so I think that that's the justification. But I do think that we need to step up and help make sure that the land that we bring in meets higher density, affordability, making sure we've got the transit accessibility. I think the city of Sherwood has done a great job on creating a livable growth concept. I think that they've got all the right parts. I just think we need to amp it up, because I think that's what it's going to require to actually meet the needs going forward. So I think that lays out kind of where I'm sitting. And I do think that in terms of next steps, yes, there will be a COO recommendation, but I do think that there is time and space here to start talking both staff to staff and elected to elected with the city of Sherwood of what more can be done in order to take on some of that growth, and what would they need to be able to achieve that? What more help do they need? If they're making assumptions based on past experience and their ability to charge SDCs, like what more do they need in terms of being that help? I know Highway 99 W has been a constriction and a barrier in the past, and we even had it in the transportation measure for planning. But what more along those lines do we need to start thinking about in terms of partnering with the cities that are going to be able, that are wanting to take on this this challenge? Because if we go back, the last urban growth boundary expansion actually set conditions for the first time, and also did that because they recognized that we didn't want to do Damascus again, where we expanded, but there was no plan, no fiscal plan. And so I think if we're going to increase the number of conditions, whether small or large, we also have to recognize that we have a responsibility to help with the fiscal financial aspects of that. That is not just then on the city of Sherwood to do alone. So I think that's where I'm at. I think next steps we'll get a recommendation, correct? But how would you propose that we start having discussions with the city of Sherwood about their capacity and some iteration and feedback based on what you're hearing from the council?
Thank you, Council President Peterson, for the question. And I think I would look to staff as well to chime in. You know, I think one of the wonderful things about the direction to have a roundtable that the council gave to us is that we are already in dialogue with Sherwood and with other other stakeholders. And so I think, I know Sherwood is listening now, but certainly setting up some, right behind me. And probably out in the ether too. I think we'll connect with them, based on this feedback. And I think, certainly I appreciate the conversation and more of an iterative COO recommendation rather than a, blocking off my portion before your portion. So really, really appreciate the feedback today. And, I think maybe we'll start there and come back to you. Does that sound good?
Great. Okay, so I think we have two things coming out of this. Obviously, the next steps of that COO recommendation and the work behind that, but also in the next couple of days, figuring out, can we add another 15 days to the public comment period, how that affects it. And if we go into January, are we going to get any kind of pushback? So.
And I will volunteer some of my review time as tribute if we need to shorten it.
And then I just want to say thank you again to the staff for really, for the first time, really spending the time upfront to deal with the assumptions that went into this report and really allow a big conversation prior, because I think that's part of why this is not as controversial this time. And as you said, Aaron, most people have already seen a lot of the assumptions going in prior, and they have a good handle. So it's not a big reveal and a big surprise and a big, right? So I think that is justification to the good work that you've done, that, we're not inundated right now with a lot of issues coming into our email boxes. People know, they understood, they've been heard. That's a testament to the work that y'all have done. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Appreciate that. We'll see you back here soon. And we'll move on to Chief Operating Officer Communication. Really, there's more?
I know. Are you sick of me yet? It's okay.
No.
I'm going on vacation. You want me for a few weeks. I wanted, if you didn't mind, you could indulge me. I wanted to specifically call out some of the folks who have worked on the affordable housing recommendation. I think what we see publicly is the tip of a very, 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 very large iceberg of people and work and expertise that went into this process. And folks who worked through holidays, worked 12 to 14 hours, 20 days in a row. This was a very intense process over the last 6 months, very public. Every detail mattered. We were communicating about Metro with every word that we said, every agenda that we put together, every slideshow, every step, and every single person that I'm going to recognize contributed to that. And it's been an absolute honor and pleasure to have experienced that with them. So first, I want to call out the core project team, our project manager, Elizabeth Getzinger. You are amazing. He's an early riser. Want to call out Val Galstad in the COO's office. Thank you so much. Craig Beebe, I don't know if he's here, but he also came in clutch with some French gummies from his travels, not the fun kind, just the delicious kind, earlier today to give us all a boost going into the work session. Want to shout out to Gap D, Andy Shaw, Jenna Jones, and Ashley Schofield, who did an incredible amount of work. And Marissa Grass, I see you there. Thank you. Want to thank Holly Calhoun, our Deputy COO, one of our Deputy COOs, Patricia Rojas and Liam Frost, in our housing department. Our subject matter experts there who are absolutely outstanding. Emily Lieb, Melissa Arnold, Yesenia Delgado, our communications folks there, Israel Bear and Emily Green. In finance, Brian Kennedy, Rachel Lembo, Josh Harwood, and Jane Marie Ford. In the council office, Kristen Dennis, Nick Christensen, communications, yes, Kristen. The list goes on. Sabrina Owens Wilson, our DEI director, our Metro Council, Carrie McLaren and Shane Abma. Thank you for all the wonderful discussions / arguments. I think we landed in a good place. My scheduler, Summer Beanland, who has not only helped schedule all these things, but resisted the calls of additional meetings that happened during this time. And then last, but certainly not least, President Peterson and the Metro Council, thank you for trusting us with this process and creating the space for us to really meaningfully engage. I felt completely empowered to engage meaningfully with our community and to receive whatever authentic information came forward. And I think that that's so important to having a result that reflects how the community really feels. Recognizing that there are, still differences of opinion, but it just made the process really special. And I think this is, regardless of where you land at the end of the day, an experience that I'm going to take with me for a long time. So really just appreciate it. And I'm sorry if I missed.
Well, you forgot the one person on that list was you.
Oh.
So a round of applause. Anything else for the good? No, good. Thank you. Thank you. All right, Counselor Communications. Oof. Look at everybody. Talked out.
It's been hot on the 4th of July, so everybody's just trying to hunker down and get through it.
Good discussion today. Good
Yeah.
discussions.
Yeah, no, I think two very big topics that we have worked as a team to get through fantastically. So yeah, I appreciate everybody's hard work.
Thank you.
Okay. With that, we are adjourned, and our next scheduled meeting is Thursday, July 11th.
We're meeting at
10:30 a.m.
3:75 right away with Annalise.